We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
Videocasts like this.
Podcasts like this.
Crowdcast events with famous authors.
Live quizzes.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you'll never forget.
There's only one way to guarantee getting all of this, to getting it before anybody else, and that's to sign on to be a supporter on Patreon.
Full details at this address.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Right, well, welcome to another Word in Your Attic, where we are thrilled to be joining an old pal whose 55 years of photography have featured some of the most significant pictures of the Stones and Jimi Hendrix and Marianne Faithfull and Kate Bush and countless others ever taken. It's really, really exciting to see you. The great Gered Mankowitz.
Well,
fantastic. Welcome. Gered, where are you? I think you're in some remote part of Cornwall, aren't you?
Yes, it's not. Yes, I'm in Cornwall. All of Cornwall is a bit remote, but
Yes.
we're on the side of a hill with a wood above us and views across to Plymouth from the garden. It's beautiful.
Have you been there for the entire duration of the unpleasantness?
Yes, and
God,
how
lovely.
it's ghastly, isn't it? I have been. We've been here pretty much locked down. I mean, we're terribly privileged and lucky to be here. We've got everything we need. We've got beautiful places to walk to. So it's been easy and for us, but it's a ghastly thing for everybody, one way or another. I mean,
it is. It is.
Yeah.
Really terrible. Really
Yeah.
terrible.
So would you normally be down there at this time of year, or is it because of the circumstances? I mean,
No,
go on.
It's our home.
Right.
I mean, this is our home. This is where I'm based. This is where I
Oh,
live.
right. I thought you lived
Oh,
in-
really?
Yeah.
See, right. Okay.
No, it's not a second home. This is
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
This is
Okay.
I'm in my office, which is in my garden, and this is it. And so working from home has been no different during lockdown, really, except slightly later starts because of the enormous increase in ghastly news that one has to take on board first.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
It's not
You don't have to
compulsory.
carry it around on a sack all day.
No,
you know.
you can go and read a P.G. Woodhouse novel,
Yes,
or
absolutely.
play the ukulele in a deck chair, or start drinking gin a bit early. It's not essential. Not mandatory.
No, maybe it isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. It's certainly getting harder and harder and harder to take it all on board. But yeah, so this is it. This is me in my office, pretty much as I normally am, only
And have you
surrounded
got
by
some-
a lot of junk.
Yes, which hopefully you're going to show us some of it. But I mean, we ought to start, shouldn't we, Dave, with the traditional question.
Oh, yeah, go on.
Can you remember what record playing equipment was playing in your home, your parents' home, when you were growing up,
Oh wow!
and the
Well,
kind of music it was playing?
I do actually. My mum and dad had a big old stereogram. I'm trying to remember if I can remember the make. I think it was HMV.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, and a big wooden cabinet
Yes.
with a record deck and a radio. And it was in the sitting room. I used to sneak in there. They didn't have a lot of music. Funnily enough, although my dad was involved with the theatre and everything, the house wasn't filled with music. Let me put it that way. There were a few show albums.
Right.
Then I would, things like The Pajama Game and West Side Story.
Nothing wrong with that at
Yeah.
all. They were big
Those are the ones
things.
you leave out to impress people. Yes.
Yes. Well, and then I remember the first record I ever actually bought was Diana by Paul Anka.
Right.
Oh, right.
I'm not sure whether that's an embarrassing thing to.
No, that's
No,
fine.
they claim
It's
to-
still,
You're
it's
among
still
friends.
remembered to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember playing that on the stereogram and sort of dancing around the sitting room, and my dad rather grumpily telling me to turn it down. All those traditional things.
So
But-
even though your parents were presumably kind of quite bohemian, were they, as compared to, because you're very well-known playwright, Wolf Mankowitz, was it a bohemian upbringing or not?
And that's interesting. I'm not sure whether I would describe it as bohemian. I think it was sort of liberal, social, progressive,
Right.
arty, you know, a lot of culture around us in terms of art and furniture. Not, as I say, not a huge amount of music, a lot of theatre, a lot of theatricals, sort of cocktail parties with interesting people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you introduced to flamboyant actors at a young age, where they were always in the front room.
In fact, I've got quite a funny story. You've reminded me. I bought with me the first. Paul Anka was the first record I probably bought, but this was the one that really changed everything.
That's on the top rank label. I can't see what.
See the label. What's the name of it? We can't read it from here. What's the record?
It's Stay. Maurice Williams and the Zodiac.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Okay.
1960.
Oh,
yeah.
And that was the record that really pretty much changed everything for me. But there's also a story associated with it. I was playing it on the stereogram very loud because I thought the house was empty. And it was a Sunday, and my dad was expecting the actor Charles Laughton for lunch.
No!
Oh, this is incredible.
And his wife, the actress Elsa Lanchester.
Oh, that's even more impressive.
Who played the bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, God.
And I was playing this music very loud. I was so into it. And the door to the sitting room opened, and there was Laughton looking in, and, you know, because the front door had been open, nobody had greeted him. He'd looked in, and Elsa Lanchester was peeping round him like the bride of Dracula. And he said to me, "Turn that bloody noise off and tell your father Laughton's here."
That's fantastic. That's the best. Can you turn down the music story I've ever heard?
That is absolutely immaculate.
Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester.
Yeah.
I only recently caught up with Charles Laughton's film about Rembrandt, where he plays Rembrandt with Elsa Lanchester. You can find it on YouTube. I cannot recommend it too highly. It's absolutely brilliant. That's extraordinary.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
It's quite a fun story, yeah.
So
can you remember any of the first, gigs you saw? Because you left school at 15, didn't you? I think
I did,
and finished up within a year, age 16, taking photographs of musicians. I mean, how did that happen? How did you make those connections?
Well, I knew that I knew I wanted to be a photographer around about 11 or 12, and I wanted to be in show business as well. I couldn't act. There was no future for me in that regard. So, as my interest in photography evolved, I just assumed that I could be a show business photographer, whatever that meant, And I think when I was sort of 13, 14, I assumed that it would lead me perhaps to be a film director one day or something. And I'd always loved the theater. I'd always go whenever I could backstage with my dad. When I was a kid, my dad had an interest in a theatre at Swiss Cottage called the Embassy Theatre. And on Saturday, they used to do repertory there. And they had a sort of permanent company, which included David Kossoff and Alfie Bass and Miriam Carlin. And I used to go with my dad on Saturday for the rehearsals and spend the day there and have lunch with everybody. And they would all give me bits of makeup, and then I'd go home and I'd turn myself into, Scrooge or whoever it was, and walk around. But I always imagined that I would have something to do with the theatre and film. And my first real gig was shooting a musical called Fiorello at the Bristol Old Vic when I was 16, and that. I became the youngest photographer ever to have a front of house in London, because that transferred to the Piccadilly Theatre and they took my pictures with them. Right. And then I started photographing actors, and then I photographed two actors called Jeremy Clyde and Chad Stewart, and they sang as Chad and Jeremy.
Yes.
And that's how I got into the music business, really. Through them, I sort of started working for John Barry, who was the A&R man at Ember Records, and Ember Records gave me my first ever album cover, which was Annie Ross, which was in 1963. And then I did Chad and Jeremy's Yesterday's Gone album, and that was it, really. Everything just sort of snowballed, and I realized that I was in this extraordinary place. It was showbiz, it was full of fantastic characters, great talent and everything. But they were all young. They were all actually my age or just a little bit older. And they were all interested in what I was doing. You know, there weren't young photographers at that time. I mean, Bailey and Duffy and Terence Donovan were all lurking in the fashion world, but there weren't any photographers of my age trying to make it in music. So I just fell into it, and then doors opened actually incredibly rapidly. I mean, Chad and Jeremy, I met Marianne Faithfull, started working with her. And
was that when you took the pictures of her in the Salisbury? Is it the Salisbury, St Martin's Lane? There's beautiful pictures, and they're really well known in the pub. Was that so? You were literally still a teenager when you took those pictures.
Yeah, she and I are around about the same age. We were both 17 when we did.
Wow!
So you weren't old enough to be in the pub.
Oh, do you know? I've never thought about that.
Well, I've just thought of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's no statute of limitations. They can come and take you away tomorrow.
Oh.
These are fantastic pictures, though. They're still extraordinary photographs. Because you were, and people will be familiar with these. And you did quite a lot in black and white, didn't you, in those days? I
did almost everything. I just want to flash this. I know I shouldn't promote that.
No, God,
absolutely.
Be fair. Be
fantastic.
Fair.
So this is a new book that's just coming out soon, and Marianne described herself as a fabulous beast who should be seen very rarely, and that's a picture that I never published before, and I think she just looks so beautiful.
She looks
absolutely
exquisite.
Yeah,
and this is like my 9 sessions that I did with her in the 60s, and they've never been collated before, because the extraordinary thing is, and you'll understand this better than a lot of other people will, but when you take a set of photographs, you perhaps might take a roll of 12 or maybe 10 rolls of 120, but of those only 3 or 4 will ever really get used, and all the rest just disappear. Yeah. And all mine just went into a bag and were probably never looked at. And I wanted to put them together in a book, the Marianne pictures particularly. And when I started looking at them again, I thought, well, I'm not sure whether I remember seeing this. I sort of remember taking it, and it was an extraordinary revelation that they have such life and energy still, and they're still so beautiful. But going back to your thing about black and white, in those days, really, the media was black and white.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So there was very little market for colour.
All the music papers were, weren't they?
Yeah, they were all black and white, and so black and white was the key. And I'd colour. I'd take a roll of colour here or a roll of colour there, but usually they got lost, because back in those days, if you were reproducing colour, they would reproduce it from the original transparency, but they'd never return it.
No, because it had been on a scanner, hadn't it? Or that was later, was it? It probably just got it was trodden underfoot, probably eventually in some colour house or something.
Absolutely.
Also, nobody had any real value of its idea of its worth,
Oh, none at all. I mean, none at all. And people are always extraordinarily taken aback by that. But I mean, when you try and explain that nobody was interested in the past, then of course, we were all interested in Elvis and that, but the immediate past, but nobody was interested in the Rolling Stones past or Marianne's past. It was all about what was going to happen next.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, but that must have struck you. I mean, there's pictures of Marianne. I mean, that cover is extraordinary, and I've never seen that picture before. It's breathtaking, because you must have looked through the lens and thought, my God, she's beautiful.
I did.
I mean, seriously.
No, I did. I mean, she was incredibly, she was entrancing and enchanting, and she was beautiful, and she was bright, and she was funny, and she was absolutely adorable, and she was wonderful to work with, and a lovely person to be with, and I enjoyed her company, and we got on a treat, and I hung out with her a lot, and it was, yes, she was breathtaking. I mean, what can I tell you? And everybody, when we went to the pub, talking about the Salisbury pub, it was open, obviously. And I went in, asked the manager if I could take some. And he said, fine. And we found the booth and everything. And in the glass, the sort of cut glass behind her, mirrors, there's reflected, regular boozers, and they're young lads drinking up, and they are eyeing her in the mirror, and
they're only human.
Only human, absolutely. And they were really ogling her. And when I presented the pictures to Decca Records, they rejected the famous picture, because of the people
in the mirror.
Why is this? They rejected that picture, or there's one where she has her arm up on the.
Yes.
Because it's a gin palace, isn't it? Really,
It's
got extraordinary ornate fixtures.
That's right. And they had some window seats, and I did another set there. I did about 5 or 6 setups in the pub. And the one that they used for me was relatively speaking dull compared to that beautiful one. But and the picture that we're talking about, the beautiful picture of her in the pub, that basically was lost until the 1980s, I guess. I mean, I never saw it. I never published it. I don't think anybody ever saw it.
So where did it turn up?
Well, what happened was that in the beginning, in the early 80s, my career, I thought, was going to evolve. At the end of every decade, I think I'm going to have to give up music photography because I'm too old. So at the end of the 60s, I assumed I was going to have to give up music photography. And then at the end of the 70s, I thought the same thing. And as I moved into what I thought was going to be another career, I decided to try and consolidate what had been 20 years of music photography into an exhibition and a book. And I went to see Sue Davis, who ran the Photographers Gallery, and she very generously gave me a show. She coupled me up with an older photographer called Harry Hammond.
Of course.
And we did 30 years of music photography, the first time anybody in this country ever done that. And it was a fantastic show. I mean, it really was a good show. And Harry and I each had about 60 pictures in it. That's what you were filming.
That's what we came to.
Yeah, and also coincided with magazines, music magazines, kind of getting into the idea of nostalgia, which up till that point they hadn't really. It was mostly about the present and the future. And suddenly there was a huge, huge market for going back and reminding people, of their lives when they were teenagers or 20 or whatever.
Absolutely. And this was all sort of triggered off. And what was interesting was that although Sue Davis saw the value in music photography and what we were doing, which was really what was important to us both, they didn't appreciate the audience because they were used to a dozen people coming in through the day, photographers or people just interested in classic photography. And suddenly on a Saturday morning, they had hundreds of kids, hundreds of young people outside the Photographers Gallery. They had to charge $2 bob or something in order to try and control it because and then they toured the show. The British Council toured the show to about 8 or 9 galleries around England over the next 2 years, and it really did break records. I mean, it sounds mad, but it did. And so it was a very well attended, very well seen show. And that triggered off not just interest in my archive, but me making a concerted attempt to recover all this work. I had it, but it was literally in plastic supermarket bags, taking up room under my desk, getting in my way me, with me saying, why am I keeping all this stuff?
Yes. So you and presumably I can tell from those drawers behind you, you're now quite organized. You've seen the value in going through everything and labeling it and dating it and so forth.
It's been my life now for a long time because, my commercial career petered out as we went into the noughties. People weren't interested in me. I mean, they really weren't. And I was struggling with my commercial career and doing everything that I could to keep it going. But it wasn't really fun anymore. It was a real struggle. But simultaneously, interest in my archive was increasing. And I suddenly thought, well, hold on a minute. This is ridiculous. I'm flogging this dead horse of commercial career. And yet this exciting new potential of working with my archive is going, look, do something with me.
Yeah, sure.
And so I decided, well, that's it. I sold my studio and we planned to move to the country because I thought, well, I can work from anywhere. I got a great big printer. I decided that I would focus, and I'm pleased it looks organized.
Yeah, it does.
It looks more organized than it is, but I can pretty much find most things within about 3 or 4 minutes, I guess.
So was it through Marianne Faithfull you met the Stones and you came to photograph the Stones?
It was because Marianne was managed by Andrew Loog Oldham, and although I didn't meet him while I was photographing Marianne in these early days, the first few sessions, he loved the pub pictures, and he was obviously seeing my work, but I was dealing with a minion from his office. And then one day I got a call from the minion saying, Andrew wants to see you. He wants you to meet the Stones. And this was at the end of '64. And I went to Ivor Court, the office there, and Gloucester Place. And there was Andrew with his marijuana wallpaper. He had this extraordinary wallpaper that had sort of 3D marijuana leaves all over it. And he had his crew, and there were the Stones. Right. And it was lovely. I mean, they were incredibly welcoming and friendly, and actually they were really sweet. And we just sort of talked, and then the next thing I knew, I was doing a session with them, which was...
What was the first one? What was the first one you did? Can you remember?
Did you do one before Between the Buttons?
Yes, yeah. I did Out of Our Heads.
I've got it here.
I did that one. That's the first session. Pulled out instantly.
I got it out. I got it out in preparation. It's always been one of my favourite covers.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Was this taken in Mason's Yard in somewhere like that in St. James's?
It was actually taken in Ormond Yard, which is the other side of Mason's Yard. My studio, 9 Mason's Yard, was literally in the corner of Mason's Yard, and an alleyway went underneath my studio from Ormond.
I know.
And that picture was taken in Ormond Yard, and that sort of V-type structure, that narrow structure, is actually 2 huge wooden hoardings that were used to protect a building site. Just out of shot, there is a huge building site, and that's what I was using as a background. And then I saw this narrow shape, and I just thought, wow, that's going to work for an album cover. I had no idea whether I was going to get an album cover, but
it was taken on spec.
Did they know precisely what kind of attitude and mood they wanted to put across, or were you involved in directing them and trying to, coax some kind of performance out of them?
No, I think that all photographers have to try and capture a moment, and in order to capture that moment, you have to try and direct people into that same nanosecond, especially if you're working with a band, because otherwise there's people blinking and moving and everything. So you have to pull them together somehow, if that's direction. But the actual mood, I think, was already established by the band and Andrew. I think they'd been through in '63 and '64. They'd been through all the preliminary stuff, and out of that emerged the antithesis of the Beatles, this group of individuals, quite aggressive, quite moody, quite sullen, quite sexy. And I think that was already there. And the idea of them smiling at the camera, or me even asking them to smile,
would have been wrong.
Would have been completely wrong. And, but
as Keith always used to say, the Beatles wore the white hat and they wore the black hat. It was a kind of cowboy analogy, wasn't it?
Absolutely, that's a good way of putting it. And Andrew understood that, because Andrew had worked with the Beatles. He knew exactly what market the Beatles had aimed for, what Epstein wanted for the Beatles, and he realized that meant there was this huge void that wasn't being filled by the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And that's where he wanted to put the Stones. And I think they were, completely up for it.
Have you've obviously photographed loads of groups over the years. Have you found that the best groups just kind of know how to pose? They know how to kind of they form a picture naturally. Is there any sense in that?
Well, They do now.
Right.
And I think from about late 60s, early 70s, they all had a reasonable idea. I think in the 60s, we were, without consciously knowing it, we were laying down the blueprint. I mean, nobody imagined for a second that that's what was happening, but we were. So, you know, when I shot, for instance, the Yardbirds in Ormond Yard, with a picture called Bowler Hat. I don't have it here, but it's quite famous because I captured a man in a bowler hat with a rolled umbrella between Keith Relf's legs as he was walking past.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it captured that sort of the band, who are in a classic, what now called a classic V formation, you know, with Keith at the front and then Jimi and Jeff on one side and Chris and I can't remember. And it's a V formation, which is a classic sort of form for a band of 5 people. And I think, I don't remember where I got that from. I just don't remember, but everybody fell into it because it's a sort of natural.
Yeah.
What the big problem with all bands, and I expect it still is the way they come to terms, the way they deal with being at the back. Somebody has to be in the back.
Yes.
And the thing with the
Bill,
Stones,
usually the drummer.
but
You always
Bill,
imagine photographers are saying, right, the singer at the front and the lead guitarist saying, you back a bit, mate. Yeah, go on. Jet Black and the Stranglers. Keep walking, mate. Yeah, behind that tree. Perfect, you know.
drummers and
nothing
bass,
personal.
the funny, what I always try to do is I try to always explain to them that it doesn't matter where they are. They just have to focus on what they're doing, how they address the camera. And in that picture, in Out of Our Heads, Bill is addressing the camera. He might be the smallest face, but he's addressing the camera.
No, he is. It's true.
He is.
They're all. Yeah.
And he has a presence, even though he's at the back. And trying to get that across, because it's very easy for people to feel that they've just been, you know, pushed to the back. And forgotten about.
Sure.
I photographed a band last year, a very sweet band, lovely young band, 5 of them, and I photographed them as part of a little film that Rankin was making about several photographers, me included. And so I was working with them as I would always work with a band. I was just working with them in the way I don't know any other way to do it. Anyway, afterwards we were having a chat, and I said, "How was it? You know, how was it for you compared to what?" And the one bloke said, I can't remember his name. He said, "It was amazing. You're the first photographer ever to call our names."
Oh,
so,
right.
Well, nobody bothers about our names. They just say you in the red scarf or you in.
Yeah.
And I got, you know, one of the things I used to do was to get everybody's name, and I don't have a very good memory, but I seem to be able to get everybody's name and talk to them as individuals and pull them together to create an interesting shape. I mean, that's sort of basically what I do.
The first time I was really aware of your pictures, I mean, obviously I knew that record, but was, and I haven't got a copy of it here, was Big Hits, High Tide and Green Grass, the first Rolling Stones compilation, which has loads of pictures inside. Well, it was the first one I actually remember. It had a booklet inside, didn't it? It had colour pictures inside.
It did.
And many of them were taken, I think, in RCA recorders in Hollywood. Is that right? And taken by you. You were on tour with them at that time, weren't you?
That's right. That was Big Hits came out in '66, and all the pictures were taken at RCA Studios in Hollywood at the end of the autumn 1965 tour, which I went on, which they took me on. And when they finished the tour, they went into the studio to record Aftermath, or what became Aftermath. And I shot the first 2 or 3 days, and then I went home and they stayed and finished the album. But yes, it was a lovely package. And I wish I'd got the cover, but Guy Webster had done this beautiful session with the band in Northern California, and they used that. by the river, pictures of them by a river, which was lovely.
But you got all those pictures of them. I was writing a bit about this in my most recent book. The thing that we used to love about the Stones was the infinite variety of all their clothing. And
Yes.
so you've got pictures of Keith kind of sitting on a stool in the studio, and he's wearing blue shades.
Yes.
And then an aviator jacket, and I think there may have been cords on his trousers. You know, it was all the variety. We used to look at that and go, "Oh my God, look at that buckle!
Yeah.
Look at those shoes! It's all those tiny bits." And there were, of course, in those days, there was no stylist involved, was there? That was just how they turned up.
Yes. And also remember that in '65 they were still pretty broke. They didn't have a huge amount of money, and it's funny you mentioned shoes, because during that first session, they had some very, very strange shoes, which people pick up on now. You know, if I post a picture on my Instagram, I'll get feedback from, from old mods particularly, who go, "Oh my God, you know, whatever it is, bowling shoe number 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something.
You used to wear corduroy shoes. Do you remember? George Harrison had a pair of cord shoes. That's pretty
they're
fantastic.
quite popular.
Yeah,
It rather suggested you didn't have to walk on anything difficult, didn't it? Really, it rather suggested a life spent indoors in 5-star hotel suites.
Pub shoes.
I don't think there was a lot of walking done in those days.
No. I like the idea. You see, Instagram has come along, Gered, and it's just the perfect medium for your ancient Rolling Stones pictures, isn't it? You know, because that's where you want to closely focus on those tiny little details of style, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say I was resistant to social media, but I don't feel particularly comfortable on it. But I realized that, you know, one has to embrace technology. I mean, I tried to embrace digital technology from the mid-90s onwards, and it worked for me, and I made it work as well as I could. But you know, I'm not an early adopter in general, and so I like things to settle down, formats to be established. You know, I did not buy one of the first, whatever they were called, beta cam. You know what I mean? When people pick up. So, but yes, Instagram is great, and I enjoy being on it, and I enjoy trying to plan our sort of month's schedule, and I'm getting lots of feedback. I'm building up my following, and I'm very pleased about it. But I feel I wouldn't say I feel completely comfortable at all with it, but I realize it's something that one has to embrace.
It's a fantastic medium. I mean, when you've got those, because one of the things that must strike you, because you took all these pictures, you know, particularly the ones you took in the 60s, you must see loads of sessions nowadays where people are trying to artfully reproduce, you know, what you did naturally all those years ago. You know what I mean? You see loads of sessions in fashion magazines trying to look like the 60s or the 70s or whatever.
I actually got you to do that on the cover of Mojo. I can remember very early when I got you to take a picture of Oasis in exactly the same frame, really, as Between the Buttons. I can't remember, was it Primrose Hill? I can't remember where that was taken now, but
it was Primrose Hill, and it was. You weren't at the session though.
No, I wasn't.
Yes, well, that's the original. That's the Between the Buttons, and because you and I talked about, you know, you very nicely asked me if I would photograph Oasis for the cover, and to be honest with you, I thought Oasis were a tribute band at that point in time. I saw them as a Beatles, Rolling Stones tribute band. I didn't, you know, that was it.
And so that's reasonable. Certainly echoes of both very strongly. Yeah, go on.
So when we came to talk about what we were going to do, and you mentioned the Rolling Stones and the Primrose Hill thing, and I just went, yeah, let's do a pastiche of that.
It was fantastic.
It fits.
With a slight fisheye lens or something, wasn't it?
I did the same thing as I did with that, only I made it a little more extreme. I cut a hole in a piece of black card, and I put Vaseline on a piece of glass in front of the lens, and I photographed it in exactly the same way as I did the Stones, but made it a little bit more graphic because it was for the cover. So I wanted to give you some black space for your logo.
That's right. It was a huge seller.
There's probably a button on Instagram that you can press nowadays that just applies a filter. That's what you should do, Gered. You could copyright a filter on Instagram. The Gered Mankowitz filter. You should do that. That's what they're doing in the world of studios. You can buy plugins for your online recording rig that makes your record sound like it was engineered by Eddie Kramer in 1966.
Really? Good
Oh,
God.
seriously, you can. That's what you should do, Gered. I'll give you that advice for free.
Thank you.
You've probably got a load of gear there that you had a chance to show us. Have you got any other records and things you've got to dig out?
Well, I dug up a load of stuff, but I'm just I'm just enjoying chatting.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I don't even know where to start. Because I wanted to bring this into it. Do you remember this?
Oh yeah.
Of course. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Go on. And you've got a pristine copy. Did you take those pictures?
This is an original copy. Yeah. So
it is. Oh, you did those. Do you know, I didn't know you did those.
Fantastic.
Oh, wow.
I didn't either. Yeah.
So I that was quite fun to bring, because apart from anything else, being the first ever round sleeve, as far as I know, and of course, it was a great marketing ploy, but it was a disastrous commercial. It rolled off the shelves.
It rolled off the shelves. It fell apart. Also,
it tore very quickly. It had little tiny hinges, didn't it? And it tore.
If you were people like me, you took it away to college and then folded it out and put it on the wall of your room. I didn't even know that Gered took those pictures.
No.
And so where were they all taken? They're all taken at the homes of the small faces.
Yes. Just a technical thing. I've lost, because there's so little daylight today. We've got rain. I had put a light up, which has just gone, but it doesn't really matter, does it?
That's fine. Don't worry, we can see you.
Fine.
We can see you.
Yeah.
As long as you can see me. The exposure's changed a little bit.
No, that's fine. Any other bits of stuff there?
Yeah, well, I dug a few bits out because I was so concerned that we would run out of things to say.
We can talk about old photographs all day long.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But so the small faces, the idea was that I'd photograph them individually, do individual portraits, and have the other guys in the background. And that's what we did. And I shot Ronnie in his little music room, which was sort of covered in old egg boxes to try and keep the sound down, and Steve Marriott in his disgusting flat at Chiswick, which was just full with dog shit everywhere and stuff, and we did Mac in my studio because his flat was so small we couldn't get into it, and it was just fun. And then it was a great project to be part of. I loved Immediate. I mean, I know Immediate's, there's a lot of stuff, negative stuff about Immediate, which I'm very well aware of, but to work there was an inspiration. I just loved it. I loved working with all of them, and we had such fun. It was so creative. And Andrew Oldham, was just such an inspiration to work with. So it was a fabulously creative time, and I did some, I think, really good work. I did Kafunta with P.P. Arnold.
Oh, of course you did.
Which was a revolutionary sleeve, an extraordinary sleeve, really, an extraordinary image for a black singer at the time, sort of trying to introduce the African roots into the picture somehow. Well ahead of its time. I did fantastic work with other bands twice as much, Vashti, etc., etc. It was just a very, very creative, fun time. Chris Farlow, Handbags and Glad Rags, and all of that stuff.
Right. So, what were the first pictures you took of Jimi Hendrix?
The first pictures I did of Jimi were in early '67. And he came to my studio, and I photographed him and the band, Mitch and Noel, and we did what I called an all-day session, which was basically 12 until 4:30. And it was just them, and Chaz Chandler was managing them and was my contact. He was the one who asked me to photograph the band, but he wasn't there. Nobody was there. Earlier on in this conversation, you mentioned the lack of stylists. But in those days, bands would just turn up. The roadies would drop them at the door. They were always hungry. I mean, that's another thing about musicians in those days. They were always hungry because they were always dragged from their beds at sort of 11:30 and thrown into the van, and they never had breakfast. So I always fed them.
And the musicians always eat all the time because they never know where the next meal's coming from. So if you present them with any amount of food, they'll just eat vast amounts of it.
Yes. So we fed them, and that was always a great opportunity to bring everything down, look at people, talk people, because often I hadn't met them before, or if I had, it had been very brief in a pub or a bar or something, or maybe in a manager's office. So we would talk, and it would give me an opportunity to, try and suss them out, break the ice, start thinking how I was going to bring them together. And usually I'd pre-lit something to get us going so that we could ease from eating into shooting without a lot of setting up. And, they just put whatever they had on. And Jimi had these 2 military jackets, plus quite a lot of other things, actually. And we did this extraordinary session. And he was so sweet, and he was so nice and gentle, and he was lovely company. It was very interesting, funny, very funny. We laughed a lot, but of course, we weren't really allowed to laugh in the pictures. We had to be mean, moody, and sexy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That was taken for granted. You had to do that.
Yes, absolutely. But he laughed a lot. I got some beautiful pictures of him laughing, and they're now almost some of the most popular. I mean, the famous picture of him smoking and exhaling, he's smiling, and that has a very sort of knowing look to it. And people love that. But
that's everybody's abiding image of Hendrix, actually, really. I think that session. Don't you think, Dave? For him in the military jacket.
I think it is. But I wanted to I did dig these out. I'd forgotten that I had these. I don't know whether that means anything.
Well, it's an enemy logo.
Is it the enemy playing cards? No.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
That's right.
God.
Yeah, the Ace of Hearts.
Isn't that funny?
I remember that. Lemmy was the Ace of Spades, wasn't he? That's
I think he probably was.
Yeah.
I haven't got the full pack.
Yeah.
So, well, there was a promotional thing. I don't remember that at all.
Stuck on the front of a copy of the NME.
Oh, really?
So I pulled that out, and then I also pulled this. I don't know whether this will show. So this was
on the cover.
My first. Whoops. That's my first cover of the Rolling Stone magazine, '92, when he got voted the greatest guitarist of all time.
Right.
Wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
And they asked, Rolling Stone wanted it to be blue, and the art director called me and said, we really want the cover to be blue. What can you do? And I said, well, there's a process called blue toning. We can blue tone some prints. And in those days, of course, it was completely chemical-based analog process, and it was terribly toxic. And so we did a load of prints, and we blue toned a load of prints, about a dozen prints, all different. Each time you did it, it came out slightly differently. I mean, it was that erratic. And we sent them about 6 or 7 prints, various shades of blue, and that's the one they chose. And I that was very thrilling. I mean, everybody talks about being on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine as being a great sort of accolade for a musician. Well, being the photographer of the cover
just the same.
Absolutely.
I was telling
you how thrilled I was.
Yeah.
When did you notice the business start to change from you talked about the days when they just turned up and got out the van and had a bacon sandwich and got on with it. When did you first start to notice that there were starting to be more people at sessions and people were starting to worry about how everything turned out?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because it was a very gradual process. I mean, I think that as the business became more professional, I mean, I think the business was incredibly amateur on many levels. I mean, when you think that when I went to America with the Stones in '65, I think it was their 4th tour of America, possibly the first one which they made any money on. Some of the promoters were people who promoted rodeos or wrestling. You know, they had no idea, really no idea. So it was everybody was learning. And as they began to learn through the latter part of the 60s, then great designers started emerging, like John Kosh and John Pash and others. And they started taking on a sort of art direction role, something that had been going on in America a little bit earlier. People like Ed Thrasher, you know, and then people started coming up with conceptual covers, not necessarily complex, but just an idea before it was taken, rather than taking a photograph and turning it into a cover. And that was really what triggered the change. And then even in the mid-60s, bands would, certain musicians at least, would always carry a little bit of what was called slap with them and try and desperately cover off a bit of acne or whatever. Brian Jones was the one in the Stones who carried the slap.
Right.
But then we started introducing, people wanted makeup in the 70s with glam rock. You know, bands wanted help to form themselves from grotesque young men into even more grotesque.
Don't bring the sweet into this.
Well, I did so many sessions with Sweet, and I got so many great pictures of them. But I always found the image quite grotesque. Yes.
We were talking about them. We were talking about them recently. The thing about the Sweet was they looked underneath it all. They looked like brickies.
Yeah,
like
just manual labourers. There's nothing you can do to lift that. No amount of makeup or clothes.
You couldn't make them look fey. It couldn't be done at all.
And you couldn't make them look feminine at all. They were just blokes dressed as women mostly. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Well, there was always one in mud. There was. I can't remember. Was his name Roy?
Les, was it? No, the guy in the dress.
Les was a singer.
Yeah, no, it's the guy in the dress.
Anyway, there was, and Steve Priest, who passed away recently, was the sort of that person in Sweet.
In Sweet.
And I did one, probably for me the fun session with Sweet was for Ballroom Blitz. Which was a fantastic song. I mean,
it's
the whole
record.
Yeah.
Great record.
Amazing record. And I was working at that time. I was working hand in glove with Chapman and Nicky Chin and Mike Chapman.
Oh, right, okay.
And Mickey Most. I was doing masses of stuff with them. And I came up with this idea for Ballroom Blitz of giving them mannequins, male and female mannequins, all dressed in traditional come dancing sort of, bright yellow net tulle and evening suits. And they're dancing, the boys are dancing with these mannequins. And there's one, and Steve is dancing with one of the male mannequins. And there's another male mannequin hanging from a sort of a noose. I don't know what was going on in the background, but it's such a sort of subversive, sort of dark and sinister, and yet they make it just ridiculously silly and fun. And I loved working with them.
Yes,
amusing.
They could never quite be cool, could they? Couldn't
no,
be done.
they couldn't.
Impossible.
It couldn't be done.
I'll tell you who could be cool, I think, and one of the greatest bands.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes.
You took that, great.
I'm a great admirer of theirs. Yeah.
Right.
And they, I mean, when you think about Slade, I mean, of course, you know, they're raucous but absolutely extraordinary. I think they're more consistent number one singles than any band ever. I mean, they really were an extraordinary band, and I did about 40 sessions with Slade. in all, throughout their from when they were called Ambrose Slade in '69.
Oh, when they were a skinhead band, weren't they?
Yes. Well, before they were skinhead,
and
they were slightly 60s and fey and long hair and velvet and scarves and everything. I did one session with them, and then I got a call almost the next day, and Chaz said, "You better come to the office because we're going to have to do another session." And I said, "Why?"
Skinheads.
And he said, "Come over and see." The office, and there were they nodding, going, "All right," and shaking their head. I went, "Oh my gosh, nobody will ever see my great session with them."
Just hold that Slade one up again, Gered. That's fantastic. I often think about this, that in those days people kind of took their shirts off without needing to have a conference about it. You know what I mean? You see, I mean, he's quite well built, Dave Hill there, but you will find photographs of like the Allman Brothers band, or stark naked in a field somewhere, and you think, how stoned were they? Nobody would have left.
How could that ever have been a good idea? Yeah.
The extraordinary thing about Dave Hill in Slade is that he really had this extraordinary vision for himself and for the band, I guess. I mean, but certainly for himself. But he wouldn't really discuss it. I mean, it was his idea to strip off, and he's holding himself, but it's his idea. It's not discussed really. And when I went on the road with them once to do the live Slade live in Wolverhampton, they were in the dressing room. And I looked around, I was trying to photograph them all in the mirror, but Dave wasn't there. I went, "Where's Dave?" He went, "Oh, I won't try and do the accent, but he's changing in the loo." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, he won't change in front of us. He'll only change in the loo because, he wants to get it right." And out he comes, SuperYob, with that ridiculous hair and and nobody really said that. They just look at him and they go, "That's Dave Hill. That's that's SuperYob." And he extraordinarily creative and very much a visionary and yes, an extraordinary character.
But wouldn't discuss it. And this again one of the things that fascinates me about bands, Gered, and you work with millions of bands. In my experience, they never talk about anything. They just somehow they never sit around a table and go, "Is it a good idea to take your shirt off or to do whatever?" They just do whatever they do because it's somehow non-you to talk about it.
That's a very interesting question, because I tried as often as whenever I could to discuss image, because you see, for me, I was trying to create images for people, or capture images, or bring an image to life, whereas perhaps a lot of your experience was somewhat more journalistic, where perhaps you and a photographer would pile into a dressing room or a meeting or room or whatever, and the band would do whatever came into their heads. And I think that was, I've always admired the photographers who can do that. I could never do that. I was never any good at that. I tried it, but I was never any good at that. If I didn't feel I had the band on my side, if I didn't feel that I was working with them, that it was a collaboration, I just felt very uncomfortable and felt very lost. So I did talk to people, and I tried to talk not so much about specifics in the image, but a feeling, or a mood, or something that would go with the tone of the single or the look of the album. I'd try and capture that. And that, so we did talk. Sometimes I remember working with a band who I like very much, but they came from Bradford, and I had a vision for them. And I tried to impose my vision on them, which I very, very rarely did, but I was convinced that they were a sort of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, that they was going to be funky and down at home and country and westernish and all of that. And they hated what I did, and what they really wanted to be, it was in tight leather trousers, with socks stuffed down the front, and that's what they really wanted for themselves. And at the end of the day, you can't impose a vision.
No, absolutely. I'm sympathising with them. Yeah.
Paul Denoyer, who you no doubt know, once did a feature for Q which is a picture feature where he went and found loads of old
Oh,
pictures.
yeah. It was called Do I Have to Wear This, Boss? Was the headline, wasn't it? Yeah.
Bands in kind of uniforms or looks. He says there's always one member of the band who looks really ill at ease.
Yes.
And the headline of the feature was, "Do I have to wear this, boss?"
Yes.
You had to work out.
It was Woody Woodmansey in the Spiders from Mars, wasn't it? It was a member of Roxy, the bassist, I think. It didn't quite work.
The original bass player.
Yeah.
Or Paul Thompson.
Paul Thompson, actually.
Paul Thompson, the early pictures of Roxy Music. He looks
doesn't
ridiculous.
quite look right.
Doesn't fit at all. He's got the wrong kind of body for it at all. But Gered, it's been fascinating talking to you. We're gonna run out of Zoom time soon.
Oh, what a shame!
You've got a show coming up, haven't you?
TV show coming up soon, or
Sky
Out.
This is really exciting for me because after nearly a decade of trying to get it made, we've managed to get made a fantastic 6 1-hour episode series about music photography. It's called Icon Music Through the Lens. It'll be on Sky Arts in the autumn. I can't give you an exact date yet. I don't have that, but it's really exciting. And as I say, it's 6 1-hour episodes. Each episode focuses on a different aspect of music photography. So the first episode is basically about studio photography, the origination of it. Second one is backstage and live. Third one is album sleeves. Fourth one is editorial, all about magazines, Mojo Q, Rolling Stone, etc., etc. And the 5th hour is about on the wall, how music photography has been elevated to fine art and is collectible and in museums and sells for big money. And then the 6th one is the future, digital, Instagram, what everybody's got a camera, that one. And it's really good. It's turned out, after it took us 10 years and to get it made, but the first 8 years were just bashing our heads against the wall, and it's so exciting to actually see it. I still don't really believe it. I don't think I'm going to truly believe it until it's actually broadcast and people can see it. But it's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to getting some feedback and reaction to it.
Well,
so, yeah.
we shall plug it heavily.
We're looking forward to seeing that, and
Very good.
we'll remind people of that as it gets nearer. We've traditionally finished these things by asking people to tell us what is the greatest record ever made. It can be as silly as you like or as serious as you like. It doesn't matter, but it's the greatest record ever made, according to Gered Mankowitz. Over to you, Gered.
I mean, what an impossible task. I mean, it's just impossible. But I've thought about it a little bit and realized that whatever happened, I couldn't really find the greatest record ever made. But I wanted a record that really has an impact on me, is All Shook Up by Ry Cooder.
Oh, right.
And All Shook Up, it means a lot to me because it was one of the first pop records that me and my chums at school tried to remember and tried to sing to, etc. And Ry Cooder, who I think is an absolute genius, his version of it that just makes me laugh and feel so happy. The first few chords that he does on the guitar are just sort of blow my mind every time I hear
Brilliant.
it. So I want to suggest that.
That's a great choice.
Okay, good.
That's terrific.
We'll all go away and listen to it.
Yeah.
And decide if you're right. And get in touch and write
Let me
angry.
know.
There is a right answer about the greatest record ever made. There isn't.
Yeah, there is no right answer.
What-
Gered, it's been a delight talking to you.
Oh, thank
Terrific.
I just worked out before we started talking that it was probably nearly 40 years since you and I had talked. Mark is slightly more.
Yeah, it was, I think,
more recent.
about 30 that we last saw each other. It's
But
great to see you again.
let's not leave it that long.
No, let's not. No, this has been great fun. I've
Terrific.
really
Really nice to
enjoyed
talk to you. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thanks
All
very
right.
much, Gered. Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.